The autumn wind carried the scent of sage and dust across the vast Montana territory, where the double-bar ranch stretched as far as the eye could see. In the fading light of another October day in 1882, Samuel "Sam" Hawthorne stood on the porch of his sprawling ranch house, watching the sun bleed crimson across the horizon. At 35, he owned more land than most men could ride across in a day. Cattle that numbered in the thousands, and a fortune built from years of hard work and shrewd business. Yet, as he gripped the worn wooden railing, his knuckles white against the grain, he felt poorer than the day he'd first set foot in this unforgiving land. The house behind him stood as a monument to his success, 2 stories of sturdy timber and stone, with glass windows that had been hauled from Denver at considerable expense. Inside, fine furniture imported from back east filled rooms that echoed with emptiness. The grandfather clock in the parlor ticked away the seconds, its steady rhythm a reminder of time passing in solitude. Sam had built this house for a family that no longer existed, for voices that had been silenced 5 years ago, when scarlet fever swept through the valley like wildfire, taking his wife Margaret and their 2 children in the span of a week. He'd buried them on the hill overlooking the ranch, under the old cottonwood tree where Margaret used to spread quilts for picnics. Since then, the house had become less a home and more a tomb for his memories. The servants came and went like ghosts, none staying long enough to disturb the grief that had settled into the very walls. Mr. Hawthorne, sir." The soft voice startled him from his reverie. He turned to see a young woman standing in the doorway, her slight frame silhouetted against the warm light spilling from inside. She couldn't have been more than 23, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun and gray eyes that seemed to hold their own shadows. This was the new maid, arrived just that morning from the placement agency in Helena. "Yes, Miss—" He realized he'd forgotten her name already, though Mrs. Henderson, his housekeeper, had introduced her hours ago. "Walsh, sir, Emma Walsh." Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if she feared the very act of speaking might shatter something fragile in the air between them. "Supper is ready, if you'd like to come inside. Mrs. Henderson said you prefer to eat at 7 sharp." Sam nodded, noting how she kept her eyes downcast, her hands clasped tightly in front of her plain brown dress. There was something about her manner that spoke of more than mere shyness, a weight she carried that seemed familiar to his own burden. "Thank you, Miss Walsh. I'll be along directly." She bobbed a quick curtsy and disappeared back inside, her footsteps barely audible on the polished floors. Sam remained on the porch a moment longer, puzzled by the strange sensation her presence had stirred. It wasn't attraction he'd buried his heart with Margaret, but rather a recognition of shared sorrow, as if grief had its own language that only the bereaved could speak. The dining room was too large for one man, with a table that could seat 12. Sam took his usual place at the head, facing the oil painting of Margaret that hung above the fireplace. The new maid moved quietly around the room, serving the meal with an efficiency that suggested experience beyond her years. Her movements were careful, deliberate, as if she'd learned to make herself small and unnoticed. "Where do you hail from, Miss Walsh?" Sam asked, more to fill the oppressive silence than from genuine curiosity. She paused in placing the breadbasket on the table. "Nebraska, sir. A small town called Willow Creek. Long way from home." "Yes, sir." A shadow crossed her features, gone so quickly he might have imagined it. Sometimes distance is necessary. Sam understood that sentiment all too well. After Margaret's death, he'd considered selling the ranch and heading further west, maybe to California where the memories couldn't follow. But the land had held him fast, roots too deep to tear free. The meal continued in silence, save for the clink of silverware against china. Sam found himself stealing glances at the young woman as she moved about her duties. There was a grace to her movements despite her apparent nervousness, and her face, though plain at first glance, held a quiet dignity that reminded him of the prairie wildflowers that bloomed after the spring rains, easily overlooked but resilient. As she cleared the dishes, he noticed her hands. They were work-worn, with small scars that spoke of hard labor, yet they handled his fine china with reverent care. When she reached for his plate, her sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing a faded bruise on her wrist. She quickly adjusted the fabric, but not before their eyes met for a brief moment. In that instant, Sam saw a flash of fear mixed with defiance, a look he'd seen before in wild horses that had been broken too harshly. "That will be all for tonight, Miss Walsh," he said quietly. "Thank you for the meal." She curtsied again and began to leave, then hesitated at the doorway. "Mr. Hawthorne, Sir Mrs. Henderson mentioned you sometimes work late in your study. Shall I leave coffee for you?" It was such a simple question, yet it had been years since anyone had thought to ask. The previous maids had followed their routines without deviation, treating him more like a fixture of the house than a man with preferences and needs. "That would be appreciated," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. A tiny smile flickered across her face, the first he'd seen from her. "I'll see to it, sir. Good evening." After she left, Sam sat alone in the dining room, staring at Margaret's portrait. For 5 years, he'd eaten his meals under her painted gaze, holding conversations with a memory. But tonight, for the first time, the silence felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but altered somehow, as if a new note had been added to the symphony of his solitude. Later, in his study, he found not just coffee but a small plate of molasses cookies beside the pot. The gesture was so unexpected, so quietly thoughtful, that he stood frozen for a moment. Margaret used to do the same thing, knowing his weakness for sweets, though he'd never admit it aloud. As he settled into his leather chair with the ranch ledgers, Sam caught himself listening for sounds of movement in the house. The new maid Emma moved like a whisper through the rooms, but occasionally he heard the soft swish of her skirts or the gentle closing of a door. It was strange how quickly the ear could attune itself to another's presence after years of emptiness. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, its lonely cry carrying across the vast Montana night. Sam set down his pen and walked to the window, looking out at the sea of grassland bathed in moonlight. Somewhere out there, his cattle grazed under the watchful eyes of his cowboys. His empire, built on sweat and determination, stretched to the horizon, yet standing there in his fine house, surrounded by the trappings of success. He felt the familiar ache of isolation settle over him like a well-worn coat. He didn't know then that the quiet young woman moving through his house carried her own ghosts, her own reasons for traveling 1,000 miles to work in a stranger's home. He didn't know that her presence would slowly begin to shift something fundamental in the carefully ordered loneliness he'd wrapped around himself like armor. All Sam Hawthorne knew that October night was that for the first time in 5 years, the house felt a little less empty, the silence a little less complete. And though he couldn't have explained why, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow's breakfast, to the soft voice that would tell him the meal was ready, to the careful hands that would pour his coffee. In the kitchen, Emma Walsh finished her duties and prepared for bed in the small room off the back stairs. As she brushed out her long auburn hair, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for finding this position, for the kindness in Mrs. Henderson's eyes, for the sadness in Mr. Hawthorne's face that made her feel less alone with her own sorrow. She'd traveled far to escape the shadow of her past, and in this big, lonely house on the Montana frontier, she sensed she might have found a refuge where her wounded heart could begin to heal. Neither of them could have guessed that their broken pieces might eventually fit together, forming something stronger than what had come before. For now, it was enough that two lost souls had found themselves under the same roof, beginning a dance as old as grief itself, the slow, careful steps toward learning to live again. 2 weeks had passed since Emma Walsh arrived at the Double Bar Ranch, and the house had subtly begun to change. It wasn't anything dramatic, no furniture rearranged or new decorations added, but rather a shift in the very air itself. Windows that had remained closed for months were now opened each morning to let in fresh autumn breezes. Dust no longer lingered on the mantelpieces, and fresh flowers from the wild meadow appeared in simple glass vases throughout the rooms. Sam noticed these changes the way a man notices the gradual return of feeling to a numbed limb slowly, almost painfully, with a mixture of relief and apprehension. He found himself lingering over breakfast, watching as Emma moved about the dining room with her quiet efficiency. She had a habit of humming softly while she worked, melodies he didn't recognize, but that seemed to carry the cadence of loss and hope intertwined. It was a Thursday morning when the first real conversation happened. Sam had risen earlier than usual, troubled by dreams of Margaret and the children. He'd wandered to the kitchen, expecting to find it empty, but discovered Emma already at work, kneading bread dough by lamplight. Mr. Hawthorne, she startled, flour dusting her hands as she stepped back from the work table. I'm sorry, sir, I didn't expect— No need to apologize, he said, feeling oddly like an intruder in his own home. I couldn't sleep. Please, continue with your work. She hesitated, then returned to her dough, her movements self-conscious under his gaze. Sam poured himself coffee from the pot on the stove and leaned against the doorframe, watching her work. The kitchen was warm and filled with the comforting scent of yeast and flour. You're up early, he observed. I like the quiet morning hours, she replied, her voice soft. Before the world wakes up, it feels like anything might be possible. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken understanding. Sam knew that feeling, the fragile hope that dawn brought, before memory fully returned with the daylight. My wife used to say something similar, he found himself admitting. She'd rise before sunrise to watch the sky change colors. Said it was like watching creation happen all over again. Emma's hands stilled on the dough. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was— The words came out rougher than intended. Margaret had a way of seeing beauty where others might miss it. In a wildflower, a bird's song, a child's laugh. He trailed off, surprised at himself. He hadn't spoken Margaret's name aloud to anyone in years, had kept her memory locked away like a treasure too precious to share. Yet something about this quiet young woman in his kitchen made the words flow easier. I lost my mother when I was 15, Emma said quietly, returning to her kneading with gentle, rhythmic motions. She used to bake bread every Tuesday and Friday. The house would smell just like this. She paused, a sad smile touching her lips. Sometimes I bake just to feel close to her again. And your father— A shadow crossed her face. He changed after she died. Grief does different things to different people, I suppose. Sam heard what she didn't say in the careful choosing of her words, recognized the particular kind of silence that covered painful truths. He'd seen enough of the world to know what could happen to young women left vulnerable after losing a mother's protection. Is that why you came west, to find a new start? She met his eyes then, and he saw surprise there, perhaps that he'd understood so readily. Yes, sometimes the only way forward is to leave everything behind. Even the good memories. Especially those, she whispered. They're the heaviest to carry. They stood in comfortable silence as she shaped the dough into loaves. Sam found himself studying her face in the lamplight, the determined set of her jaw, the gentle curve of her cheek, the way her brow furrowed slightly in concentration. She wasn't beautiful in the conventional sense, not like Margaret had been with her golden hair and laughing blue eyes. But there was something compelling about Emma Walsh, a quiet strength that drew him despite his best efforts to maintain distance. Would you like some breakfast, Mr. Hawthorne? I could fix something simple before the others wake. He should have declined, should have maintained the proper boundaries between employer and servant. Instead, he found himself nodding. That would be nice. She smiled, a real smile this time, not the cautious, practiced expression she usually wore. It transformed her face, revealing the young woman beneath the weight of whatever had driven her from Nebraska. As she moved about the kitchen, preparing eggs and bacon, Sam settled at the small servant's table, feeling more at ease than he had in the formal dining room. "Tell me about the ranch," she said as she cooked. "Mrs. Henderson says you built it up from nothing." So he told her, surprised at how easily the words came. He spoke of arriving in Montana Territory as a young man with little more than ambition and a strong back, of the early years, sleeping under the stars, slowly building his herd, of meeting Margaret at a church social in Helena, how she'd laughed at his fumbling attempts to court her, of their wedding, building the house, the births of their children, Thomas and little Sarah. Emma listened while she worked, occasionally asking quiet questions that showed she was truly interested, not merely being polite. When he reached the part about the fever, his voice faltered. "You don't have to," she began. "No, it's all right." And strangely, it was. They died within days of each other. Margaret went last, holding on just long enough to make me promise I'd keep living. I built them a proper cemetery on the hill, brought in marble headstones from Denver. Emma set a plate before him, then surprised him by sitting across the table with her own cup of coffee. In the growing dawn light filtering through the windows, her gray eyes held compassion without pity, understanding without judgment. "My mother asked me to promise something similar," she said softly. "To be happy, to find love, to have the life she couldn't finish living. It feels like betrayal sometimes, doesn't it, being alive when they're not?" Sam's throat tightened. He'd never heard anyone articulate so perfectly the guilt that had been his constant companion these 5 years. Yes, exactly that. They ate in companionable silence as the sky brightened outside. The kitchen began to stir with the sounds of the ranch-waking cowboys heading to the barn. Mrs. Henderson's footsteps on the stairs. The spell of intimacy began to fade, reminding them both of their proper roles. Emma stood quickly, gathering the dishes. "I should get these washed before Mrs. Henderson." "Thank you," Sam interrupted. "For breakfast, and for listening." She paused, meeting his eyes. "Thank you for trusting me with your memories. Mr. Hawthorne, they're safe with me." As Sam returned to his room to dress for the day, he felt something shift inside his chest. It wasn't healing that would take far longer than a single conversation over breakfast, but it was a loosening of the tight bands of grief that had constrained his heart for so long. He thought of Emma's words about promises to the dead, about the weight of good memories, about the possibility that dawn brought. Throughout the day, as he worked with his foreman Jake Morrison on plans for the winter, as he reviewed accounts and checked on the horses, Sam found his thoughts returning to that kitchen conversation. He wondered what specific shadows lurked in Emma's past, what had driven a young woman of obvious education and refinement to seek work as a maid 1,000 miles from home. That evening at dinner, he found himself watching her more openly. She moved through her duties with the same quiet grace, but now he noticed small things, how she unconsciously rubbed her wrist where he'd seen the faded bruise, how she tensed slightly when male voices were raised in laughter from the bunkhouse, how she kept herself always positioned near a doorway as if ready to flee. After the meal, as she cleared the table, she paused near his chair. "Mr. Hawthorne, I wanted to thank you for this morning. It's been a long time since anyone asked about my mother. It felt good to speak of her. Perhaps we could talk again sometime." Sam heard himself saying, "If you'd like." A soft smile touched her lips. "I'd like that very much, sir." As she left the room, Sam remained at the table, staring at Margaret's portrait. For the first time, he thought he saw approval in those painted eyes. Margaret had always been one to take in Stray's wounded birds, orphaned calves, lonely hearts. She would have liked Emma Walsh, would have seen past the servant's dress to the wounded soul beneath. That night, Sam's dreams were different. Instead of the fevered faces of his dying family, He dreamed of bread rising in a warm kitchen, of coffee shared at dawn, of the possibility that two broken people might find in each other not a replacement for what was lost, but a reason to keep the promises they'd made to the dead. The November wind rattled the windows of Sam's study as he sat hunched over the ranch ledgers, columns of numbers blurring before his tired eyes. The grandfather clock had just chimed 9 when exhaustion finally overtook him. His pen slipped from his fingers as his head drooped forward, coming to rest on his folded arms. The lamplight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the papers scattered on his desk. Emma knocked softly on the study door, balancing a tray with fresh coffee and the apple turnovers she'd baked that afternoon. When no answer came, she pushed the door open gently, expecting to find the room empty. Instead, she saw Mr. Hawthorne slumped over his desk, clearly asleep. She hesitated in the doorway, uncertain. Mrs. Henderson had retired early with a headache, leaving Emma to tend to the evening duties alone. She should simply leave the tray and depart, but something about the uncomfortable angle of his position made her pause. Winter was settling in earnest now, and the fire in the grate had burned low, leaving the room chilly. Setting the tray down quietly on the side table, Emma moved to the fireplace and added 2 logs, stirring the embers until flames began to lick at the new wood. The sudden warmth and light didn't wake him. If anything, he seemed to settle deeper into sleep, his breathing steady and deep. Emma stood there, studying him in the firelight, asleep. The lines of grief and responsibility that marked his face during the day softened. He looked younger, more like the man he must have been before a loss carved its marks upon him. A lock of his dark hair had fallen across his forehead, and she found herself fighting the improper urge to brush it back. "You work too hard," she whispered, knowing he couldn't hear. "Trying to outrun your ghosts with ledgers and cattle counts." She fetched a thick wool blanket from the chest near the bookshelf, one she'd recently washed and aired. As she draped it carefully across his shoulders, she continued her soft monologue, a habit she'd developed during her lonely years in Nebraska when there was no one else to talk to. "Mrs. Henderson says you've been like this since they passed, working until you drop, as if exhaustion might finally be enough to quiet the memories." She adjusted the blanket, making sure it covered him properly. "I understand that. After Mama died, I scrubbed that house until my hands bled, thinking if I could just make everything clean enough, perfect enough, maybe Papa would." She trailed off, shaking her head at her own foolishness. Even here, 1,000 miles away, she couldn't speak of what her father had become. The drink had taken him first, then the anger. Then finally, the hands that had once lifted her onto his shoulders became fists that left bruises she learned to hide. "But you're not like him," she continued, moving to his desk to straighten the scattered papers. "You're a good man, Mr. Hawthorne. I see it in how the Cowboys respect you, how Mrs. Henderson speaks of you, how you built this place with honest work." She carefully moved his ledger aside, placing his pen in the inkwell. "You deserve more than this loneliness you've wrapped around yourself." The coffee was cooling on the tray. Emma poured a cup anyway, setting it where he'd find it when he woke. The apple turnovers she arranged on a plate, knowing his fondness for sweets, though he tried to hide it. Such a small thing. But she'd learned that small kindnesses were sometimes all that stood between a person and despair. "I've only been here a month," she murmured, returning to stand near his chair. "But already this place feels more like home than Nebraska ever did these last years. Is that wrong of me to find peace in a house built on someone else's sorrow?" The fire crackled, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, she could hear the distant lowing of cattle and the lonesome whistle of wind across the plains. Sam shifted slightly in his sleep, and Emma noticed the bottle of laudanum on his desk, still nearly full. She knew he'd been prescribed it for the headaches that plagued him, but he rarely took it, preferring to endure the pain rather than dull his senses. "Stubborn man," she said fondly. "Just like Mama used to say about Papa before." She picked up the bottle, reading the label in the lamplight. Doctor, Peterson in town seems kind. He asked after you when I collected Mrs. Henderson's medicine last week. Said to tell you he's ready to listen whenever you're ready to talk. She set the bottle back down. But you're not ready, are you? Neither am I. Truth be told, some wounds cut too deep for sharing. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Emma moved closer to Sam's chair, emboldened by the intimacy of the moment, by the certainty that he couldn't hear her confessions. I dream about you sometimes, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Not improper dreams, just dreams where we sit in the kitchen drinking coffee, where you smile like you did that morning we talked about our ghosts. Dreams where this house isn't so quiet, where laughter lives in these rooms again. She reached out, her fingers hovering just above his shoulder, not quite daring to touch. I know it's foolish. You're my employer, and I'm just a maid running from a past I can't even speak of. But sometimes, when you look at me across the dinner table, I think maybe you feel it too, this strange connection between two broken souls. Sam stirred again, mumbling something unintelligible. Emma stepped back quickly, her heart racing. But he didn't wake, just shifted to a more comfortable position, the blanket sliding slightly. She adjusted it again, her hands gentle and sure. Your Margaret was a lucky woman, she said softly. To be loved so deeply that 5 years later, you still can't bear to change a thing she touched. The curtains she chose, the pictures she hung, that rocking chair by the window where Mrs. Henderson says she used to sit with the children. Emma's voice caught. I hope someday someone loves me even half as much. She moved about the room quietly, straightening books on the shelves, adjusting the curtains, small tasks that didn't really need doing but gave her an excuse to linger. The truth was, these evening moments when the house settled into quiet had become precious to her. During the day, she was careful to maintain proper distance, to be the perfect servant. But here, in the gentle darkness with only the fire for witness, she could pretend things were different. I should tell you, she continued, returning to stand near his desk, that I've been adding extra blankets to your bed, opening your windows just a crack for fresh air like Mama used to do. Mrs. Henderson says you sleep better lately. I hope that's true. She smiled sadly. It's the only way I can take care of you without overstepping. The clock chimed 9:30. Emma knew she should leave, but something held her there. Perhaps it was the peaceful expression on his face, such a contrast to the guarded wariness he wore during waking hours. Or perhaps it was her own loneliness, the ache for connection that had driven her across half a continent seeking something she couldn't name. I write letters to Mama sometimes, she confessed. Tell her about this place, about you, about how I'm finally somewhere I feel safe. I can't send them, of course, can't send letters to heaven, but writing them makes me feel less alone. She laughed softly, a sound with tears at its edges. Listen to me, chattering away like a magpie. Mama always said I talked too much when I was nervous. Sam's breathing changed subtly, and Emma realized with a start that he was beginning to wake. She moved swiftly to the door, pausing only to look back at him one more time. Sleep well, Mr. Hawthorne, she whispered. May your dreams be kinder than your memories. She slipped out, closing the door silently behind her. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall, her heart hammering. What had possessed her to speak so freely if he had awakened? But no, she was certain he'd been deeply asleep the entire time. Back in the study, Sam's eyes opened slowly. He remained still, processing what he'd heard. What he'd pretended not to hear, he'd actually awakened when she'd adjusted the blanket the second time. But something curiosity, perhaps, or a deeper need had kept him feigning sleep. Her words echoed in his mind. Two broken souls. I dream about you sometimes. Someone loves me even half as much. He sat up slowly, noticing the fresh coffee, the turnovers, the carefully tended fire. The blanket slipped from his shoulders, a blanket that smelled faintly of lavender and soap, of care and tenderness. He picked up the coffee cup, finding it still warm, and took a slow sip. For the first time in 5 years, Sam Hawthorne allowed himself to consider the possibility that Margaret wouldn't want him to spend the rest of his life alone, that perhaps this shy young woman who whispered secrets to sleeping men and wrote letters to heaven might be not a betrayal of the past, but a gift for the future. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the star-scattered sky above his ranch. Somewhere out there, Emma Walsh was probably preparing for bed, unaware that her whispered confessions had been heard, that her gentle kindness had reached through his careful defenses to touch something he'd thought dead forever. "What should I do, Margaret?" he asked the night. "Is it time?" The wind answered with a soft sigh that sounded almost like approval, and Sam made his decision. Tomorrow, he would begin pretending to sleep more often in the evenings, not to spy or deceive, but to give her the freedom to speak her heart, to understand better this woman who saw past his wealth and position to the wounded man beneath. It was, perhaps, not the most honest approach, but then again, some truths were too fragile for the harsh light of day. They needed the gentle darkness, the safety of supposed solitude, the pretense of sleep to unfold like night-blooming flowers. Sam smiled slightly, an expression that felt rusty from disuse. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to tomorrow evening, to feigning sleep and discovering more pieces of Emma Walsh's carefully guarded heart. The pattern established itself over the following weeks, like a dance whose steps both partners knew but never acknowledged. 3 or 4 evenings a week, Sam would retreat to his study after dinner, working until the lamp oil burned low and his eyelids grew heavy. And each time, as if drawn by some invisible thread, Emma would appear with coffee and whatever sweet she'd prepared that day, finding him asleep at his desk. At first, her whispered monologues were hesitant, full of pauses and second thoughts. But as November gave way to December and the first snows began to dust the Montana plains, her words flowed more freely, painting a portrait of a soul both wounded and resilient. "The snow reminds me of my childhood," she said one evening, standing by the frost-etched window while Sam feigned sleep behind her. "Before Mama got sick, before everything changed, we'd build snow families in the yard, not just snowmen, but whole families. Papa would laugh and help us give them personalities. The snow father was always a banker or a shopkeeper, someone respectable." Her voice grew wistful. "I wonder if he remembers those days, or if the whiskey washed those memories away too." She moved to tend the fire, her skirts rustling softly. Sam had learned to control his breathing, to keep his body relaxed even when her revelations made him want to sit up and offer comfort. Through barely opened eyes, he watched her graceful movements, the way firelight caught the auburn in her hair. "I should hate him," she continued, her back to him as she adjusted the logs. "And sometimes I do, but mostly I just feel sad for the man he became. Mama's death broke something in him that couldn't be fixed. The drink just made the sharp edges sharper." She paused, and Sam could hear the old pain in her silence. "The first time he raised his hand to me, we both cried afterward. He swore it would never happen again. But promises are fragile things when grief and whiskey do the talking." Sam's hands clenched involuntarily beneath the desk. He'd suspected as much from the careful way she moved around men, the faded bruises he'd glimpsed, but hearing it confirmed made rage burn hot in his chest. He forced himself to remain still, knowing that any reaction would shatter the fragile trust these evening confessions represented. Over the next weeks, the pieces of Emma's story emerged like a quilt being stitched together one square at a time. She spoke of trying to hold the household together after her mother's death, of taking in washing and mending to make ends meet when her father drank away his earnings, of the neighbor woman, Mrs. Kowalski, who taught her to cook and kept an eye out when things got bad. "She's the one who helped me leave," Emma revealed one snowy evening in mid-December. Saw the bruises I couldn't hide anymore and said enough was enough. She had a cousin in Helena who knew about the position here, gave me coach fare, and made me promise not to look back. She was organizing his bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines. I write to her sometimes. Let her know I'm safe. It's the only address from home I kept. But it wasn't all darkness she shared. Sam learned about her love of books, how she'd read everything she could get her hands on, often by candlelight when her father was passed out. He discovered her gift for seeing beauty in small things the pattern frost made on windows, the way horses' breath clouded in cold air, the perfect spiral of rising bread dough. "You have so many books," she said one night, pulling a volume of Tennyson from the shelf. "I've been reading them when my work is done. I hope you don't mind. It's been so long since I had access to a real library." She opened the book carefully, and Sam noticed how she handled it like something precious. Mama loved poetry. She used to recite verses while she worked. "There's not to reason why. There's but to do and die." She said sometimes life was like that. You just had to keep moving forward even when you didn't understand why. Some evenings, she would talk about the ranch, about the people here who had become a kind of family to her. Mrs. Henderson, who was teaching her to knit. Jake Morrison, the foreman, who treated her with gruff respect. The young cowboy, Timothy O'Brien, who blushed furiously whenever she served meals but always thanked her politely. "This place is healing me," she admitted one particularly cold night, adjusting the blanket over Sam's shoulders with practiced care. "I didn't think that was possible. After Mama died, after Papa, I thought I'd carry that darkness forever. But here, with the wide sky and the honest work and the kind people." She paused, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "And you, Mr. Hawthorne, especially you." She began to share more about her feelings for him, perhaps emboldened by his consistent sleep and the intimacy darkness provided. Sam learned that she watched for him from the kitchen window when he rode out to check the herds, that she'd memorized the sound of his footsteps on the stairs, that she pressed his shirts with extra care, wanting him to look his best, even in his grief. "I know it's foolish," she whispered one night, sitting daringly in the chair across from his desk, something she'd never done before. "You're still in love with your Margaret, as you should be. A love like that doesn't die just because—" She trailed off, then continued more firmly. "But I can't help hoping that maybe someday you might have room in your heart for someone else. Not to replace her, I'd never want that, but maybe alongside her memory." Sam's chest tightened at her words. Through his lashes, he could see her face in the lamplight, earnest and vulnerable. She'd pulled her shawl tight around her shoulders, and her hands were clasped in her lap like a child making a wish. "I've never felt this way before," she continued. "Back home, there were young men who called, before Papa got too bad, but they wanted a pretty face, a good cook, someone to give them sons and keep their house. They didn't want to know my thoughts or hear about my dreams. They certainly didn't want a woman who read books and had opinions." She laughed softly. "You're different. Even in your silence, even in your grief, you see people, really see them. The way you remember each cowboy's name, ask after their families. The way you noticed I'd been favoring my right wrist that time I burned it on the stove and had Dr. Peterson look at it without making me ask." She stood then, moving to bank the fire for the night. "I'm talking too much again. Mama always said my tongue would get me in trouble someday." She turned back to look at him, her face soft with affection. "Sleep well, Mr. Hawthorne. May your dreams be filled with good memories tonight." After she left, Sam sat in the dying firelight, processing all he'd learned. Emma Walsh was even more remarkable than he'd suspected, a woman who'd survived cruelty without letting it harden her heart, who'd traveled across the frontier alone seeking a new life, who found joy in small things despite having lost so much. He thought of Margaret, of what she would say about this elaborate deception he was perpetrating. But in his heart, he knew she would understand. Margaret had always been the brave one when it came to matters of the heart. She'd pursued him as much as he'd courted her, unwilling to let convention stand in the way of love. The next evening, Sam decided to add a new element to their routine. He left a book of Shakespeare's sonnets prominently on his desk, a bookmark at Sonnet 116. When Emma arrived with the coffee tray, he heard her small gasp of discovery. "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments," she read softly. "Oh, this was one of Mama's favorites." She was quiet for a long moment, and Sam could feel her looking at him. "Did you leave this for—" "But no, that's impossible. You were reading it earlier, that's all." But she took the book with her when she left, and the next night it was back on his desk. The bookmark moved to Sonnet 29. Sam smiled as he read the lines before she arrived. "When in disgrace with fortune and men's eyes, I all alone beweep my outcast state." Thus began a silent conversation through poetry. Each night one of them would mark a new sonnet, communicating through Shakespeare's words what they couldn't say aloud. It became another layer to their strange courtship, if that's what this was, conducted in whispers and verses, in the space between sleep and waking, truth and pretense. One night, as Christmas approached and snow fell thick outside the windows, Emma stayed longer than usual. She'd brought not just coffee but hot cocoa, rich with cream and a hint of cinnamon. She set a cup near his hand and kept one for herself, settling into the chair across from him with unusual boldness. "It's almost Christmas," she said softly. "My first Christmas without home, though I suppose that place stopped being home long ago." She sipped her cocoa, and Sam could smell the sweet steam rising. "What do you do for Christmas here, Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Henderson mentioned there used to be parties, decorations." She trailed off, realizing she'd touched on painful memories. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have—" But Sam wanted to answer her, wanted to give her something true even if he couldn't reveal his deception. So he shifted slightly, mumbling as if talking in his sleep. "Margaret loved Christmas." Emma went very still. He'd never spoken during their evening encounters before. "Mr. Hawthorne," she whispered. But he said nothing more, keeping his breathing deep and even. After a moment, she released a shaky breath. "Even in sleep, you think of her," she said softly. "How beautiful to be loved like that, to live on in someone's dreams." She stood, gathering the cups. "Maybe this year we could have a small celebration, nothing grand, just something to mark the season, to honor the past while still acknowledging the present." She touched his shoulder gently before she left, the first time she'd intentionally made contact. "Good night, Samuel," she whispered, using his given name for the first time. "May your sleep bring you peace." Sam sat alone in his study afterward, his shoulder still warm where her hand had rested. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. He thought about Emma's suggestion of Christmas, about honoring the past while acknowledging the present. Perhaps it was time to stop pretending in more ways than one. But not yet. These evening encounters had become too precious, her whispered truths too important. He would continue the charade a little longer, gathering the courage to finally meet her honesty with his own. For now, it was enough to know that in this big, lonely house on the Montana frontier, two wounded hearts were slowly, carefully, finding their way to each other through poetry and pretense, through whispers in the dark, and the patient tending of quiet fires. The days leading up to Christmas passed in a blur of preparation, true to her word. Emma had begun adding small festive touches to the house pine boughs on the mantelpieces, red ribbons on the stair railings, the scent of cinnamon and cloves wafting from the kitchen. Sam watched it all with a mixture of pain and something that might have been hope, seeing Margaret's beloved holiday slowly coming back to life in their home. It was December 23rd when everything changed. The evening started like any other. Sam retreated to his study after supper, genuinely tired from a long day helping Jake and the boys move the cattle to the winter pastures. He'd settled at his desk, intending to review the feed orders, when exhaustion truly claimed him. His head dropped to his arms, and he fell into the deep sleep of a man who'd spent hours in the bitter cold. Emma arrived later than usual, having been busy preparing for Christmas Eve. She carried not just coffee but a small wrapped package, which she set carefully on the side table. The study was colder than normal. The fire had burned low while Sam slept. "Oh, Mr. Hawthorne," she whispered, moving quietly to the fireplace. "You'll catch your death in this cold." She built up the fire with practiced efficiency, then retrieved the heavy wool blanket. As she draped it over his shoulders, she noticed something alarming. His skin felt hot to the touch. Despite the room's chill, his breathing, usually so steady when he slept, was labored and harsh. "Mr. Hawthorne," she touched his forehead, gasping at the fever she found there. "Sir, you're burning up." Sam stirred but didn't wake, mumbling incoherently. Emma's heart raced as she recognized the signs. She'd seen enough illness in her life to know when someone was truly unwell. Without hesitation, she ran to find Mrs. Henderson. "He's sick," she announced, bursting into the housekeeper's room. "High fever, labored breathing. We need Dr. Peterson immediately." Mrs. Henderson took one look at Emma's frightened face and sprang into action. "Timothy's still in the bunkhouse. Send him for the doctor. I'll get cool water and cloths." The next hours passed in a blur of activity. Dr. Peterson arrived within the hour, his face grave as he examined Sam. "Pneumonia," he diagnosed. "Not surprising given the weather and how hard he's been working. He needs complete rest, fluids, and someone to monitor him constantly. The next 48 hours will be critical." "I'll do it," Emma said immediately. "I'll stay with him." Mrs. Henderson started to protest. It wasn't proper for an unmarried woman to tend a man in his bedchamber, but Dr. Peterson cut her off. "Propriety be damned. This man needs round-the-clock care, and Miss Walsh seems capable, unless you want to risk losing him." That settled it. They moved Sam to his bedroom, the large master suite he'd shared with Margaret, which Emma had only entered to clean. As they settled him into bed, he thrashed fitfully, calling out names: Margaret, Thomas, Sarah. Each one was a knife to Emma's heart, but she pushed aside her own feelings to focus on his care. Through that long night, Emma barely left his side. She bathed his fevered face with cool cloths, spooned water between his cracked lips, and talked to him constantly, having read somewhere that familiar voices could anchor the ill to life. "You have to fight," she told him, wringing out another cloth. "This ranch needs you. Your cowboys need you. I need you." Her voice broke on the last words. "I know I'm just your maid, but I can't bear the thought of this world without you in it." As dawn broke on Christmas Eve, Sam's fever spiked dangerously. He tossed and turned, sometimes calling for Margaret, sometimes mumbling about cattle and ledgers, occasionally saying things that made no sense at all. Emma worked tirelessly, following Dr. Peterson's instructions to the letter. "Please," she whispered, holding his burning hand in both of hers. "Please don't leave. Not now. Not when I finally found—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't name what she'd found here at the Double Bar Ranch. Mrs. Henderson brought broth and tried to convince Emma to rest, but she refused to leave. "I'll rest when his fever breaks," she said firmly. "Not before." The housekeeper studied her with knowing eyes. "You love him?" It wasn't a question. Emma didn't deny it. Foolish. Isn't it a maid falling for her employer, like something out of a penny novel? "Nothing foolish about love, child," Mrs. Henderson said gently. "And if you could see how he looks at you when he thinks no one's watching—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Just focus on getting him well. The rest will sort itself out." As the day wore on, Emma found herself talking to Sam the way he'd heard her talk when she thought he was asleep. She told him about her childhood Christmas traditions, about the rag doll her mother made her when she was 7, About the winter she was 12 and they'd had no money for presents, but Mama had made snow angels with her until they were both laughing too hard to stand. "You have to get well so we can have Christmas," she told him. "I've been baking for days. There's a ham ready for tomorrow, and an apple pie, and those molasses cookies you pretend you don't love." Her voice caught. "I even made eggnog, though I had to guess at the recipe. Mama never wrote it down." The afternoon brought no improvement, if anything. Sam seemed to sink deeper into delirium. He called for Margaret repeatedly, apologizing for something Emma couldn't understand. Once, horrifyingly, he seemed to be reliving the deaths of his children, begging God to take him instead. "No," Emma said firmly, gripping his hand tighter. "You survived that because you were meant to keep living. Margaret made you promise. Remember, you told me that, in the kitchen that morning. She made you promise to keep living. And Samuel Hawthorne, you will not break a promise to your wife." Something in her fierce tone seemed to reach him. His thrashing calmed slightly, though the fever still raged. Emma continued talking, her voice growing hoarse but never stopping. "I need to tell you something," she said as shadows lengthened toward another night. "All those evenings in your study, when you were sleeping, I said things, private things a proper maid should never say to her employer." She laughed shakily. "But then, I've never been very good at being proper. Mama despaired of making a lady of me." She dipped the cloth again, gently wiping his burning face. "I told you I dream about you. That's still true. I dream about a life where I'm brave enough to tell you these things when you're awake, where you might care for me too. Just a little." "Doctor." Peterson returned as night fell, examining Sam with practiced hands. His expression was grave. "The fever needs to break soon," he told Emma quietly. "If it doesn't—" "It will," Emma said firmly. "It has to." The doctor left more medicine and instructions, promising to return in the morning. Mrs. Henderson brought dinner that Emma couldn't eat and more cool water for the compresses. The house settled into Christmas Eve quiet, even the Cowboys subdued by the news of their boss's illness. Alone with Sam again. Emma found herself really praying for the first time since her mother's death. "Please," she whispered to whatever power might be listening, "please don't take him. Not on Christmas, not ever, but especially not on Christmas." As midnight approached, marking the arrival of Christmas Day, Sam's breathing grew more labored. Emma could see him slipping away, could feel it in the weakening pulse beneath her fingers. Desperation clawed at her throat. "No!" The word tore from her like a physical thing. She leaned over him, her tears falling on his fevered face. "You listen to me, Samuel Hawthorne. You don't get to die on Christmas. You don't get to leave me here in this house with all these memories and no chance to make new ones. I won't let you." She pressed her forehead to his burning one, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "I love you. Do you hear me? I love you. Not as a maid loves a kind employer, not as gratitude for giving me a safe place. I love you as a woman loves a man wholly, completely, probably foolishly, and I will not let you die without hearing that truth." For a long moment, nothing changed. Then, so gradually she almost missed it. She felt moisture on his skin, not fever heat, but sweat, real, cooling sweat. His breathing, while still harsh, began to steady. The terrible burning beneath her hands began, slowly, to ease. "That's it," she whispered, hardly daring to hope. "That's it. Come back to me." Through the rest of that Christmas night, Emma kept vigil as Sam's fever broke in earnest. She changed the sweat-soaked sheets, helped him sip water when he stirred, and continued her quiet monologue of encouragement and love. As dawn broke on Christmas morning, painting the snow-covered ranch in shades of pink and gold, his eyes finally opened clear and focused for the first time in 2 days. "Emma," his voice was barely a whisper, rough from fever. "I'm here," she assured him, tears of relief streaming down her face. You're going to be all right. The fever broke. It's Christmas morning, and you're going to be all right." He looked at her for a long moment, taking in her exhausted face, her mussed hair, the way she clutched his hand like a lifeline. "You stayed," he murmured. "Of course I stayed." She tried to smile through her tears. "Someone had to make sure you kept your promise." "Promise?" "To keep living," she reminded him. "You promised Margaret you'd keep living." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went beyond fever recovery. "Emma," he said slowly, "how long have you been talking to me? Not just now, but before." Heat flooded her face as she realized what he was asking. But after everything, after nearly losing him, after confessing her love to his unconscious form, she couldn't retreat into propriety now. "Long enough," she admitted quietly. "Long enough to know I can't pretend anymore." His fingers tightened weakly around hers. "Neither can I," he whispered. And she saw in his eyes a truth that made her heart stop. He knew. Somehow, impossibly, he knew about all those evening confessions, all those whispered secrets. But that was a conversation for when he was stronger. For now, it was enough that he was alive, that the fever had broken, that Christmas morning had brought the gift of another chance. Emma squeezed his hand gently and reached for the water glass. "Rest now," she told him. "We have time for everything else, all the time in the world." As Sam drifted back into healing sleep, Emma kept watch, her heart full of a joy she'd thought lost forever. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and clean, covering the ranch in Christmas white. And in the master bedroom of the double-bar ranch, two souls who had found each other through whispers and pretense finally stood on the threshold of something real and true and worth every moment of the journey that had brought them here. The January blizzard struck without warning, transforming the Montana landscape into a howling white void. Sam had recovered from his Christmas illness, though Emma still fussed over him whenever the weather turned cold. Their relationship had shifted since that fevered night, not dramatically, but in small, significant ways. Lingering glances across the breakfast table, fingers brushing when she served his coffee, conversations that ran deeper than employer and servant typically shared. But they hadn't spoken directly about her confession or his cryptic words about pretending. The truth hung between them like morning mist, visible but intangible, waiting for the right moment to solidify. That moment was still waiting when the blizzard hit. Sam had ridden out with Jake and 3 other men to check on the cattle in the north pasture. The sky had been gray but calm when they left. 2 hours later, the storm descended like a biblical plague. Winds so fierce they could knock a man from his saddle. Snow so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. Back at the ranch house, Emma watched from the kitchen window as the world disappeared into white. Mrs. Henderson bustled about, lighting lamps against the premature darkness. "They'll hole up somewhere," the housekeeper said, but Emma heard the worry beneath her reassuring tone. "Mr. Hawthorne knows this land like the back of his hand. He'll find shelter." But as the hours passed and the storm intensified, Emma's anxiety grew. She'd heard stories of men lost in blizzards, found frozen just yards from safety. The thought of Sam out there, perhaps injured or trapped, made her physically ill. By nightfall, with the storm showing no signs of abating, Emma made a decision. She pulled on her heaviest coat, wrapped scarves around her face, and headed for the door. "Where do you think you're going, Mrs.?" Henderson demanded. "To find them. In this storm, you'll die before you get 10 feet. Then I'll die trying." Emma's voice was fierce. "I won't sit here safe and warm while he's out there." "Emma, child, be sensible." "I love him." The words exploded from her, raw and desperate. "I love him, and I won't lose him to this storm. Not after everything." "Mrs." Henderson's expression softened. "Then at least be smart about it. Take rope, tie one end to the porch rail, That way you can find your way back and take the bell, ring it constantly so they can hear you if they're close. Emma followed the advice, venturing into the white chaos with a rope around her waist and the dinner bell clanging in her frozen hands. The wind tried to tear her away. The snow blinded her, but she pressed forward, following the fence line toward the north pasture. "Sam!" she screamed into the wind. "Sam, can you hear me?" The storm swallowed her voice, but she kept calling, kept ringing the bell. Her feet went numb, then her hands. Ice formed on her eyelashes, her scarves. Still she pressed on, driven by a determination born of love and desperation. She almost missed them. If Jake's horse hadn't whinnied at just the right moment, she would have passed right by the small cluster of men and animals huddled against a rock outcropping. They'd tried to construct a windbreak with their bodies and horses, but Emma could see they were in trouble. Sam was slumped against Jake, semi-conscious from cold. "Thank God," Jake breathed when he saw her. "He took a fall when the storm hit. Think his shoulders dislocated. We couldn't move him in this weather." Emma didn't waste time on explanations. "Follow the rope," she told them. "It leads back to the house. Can you carry him?" Working together, they got Sam onto his horse, Jake holding him steady. Emma led the way, following her lifeline back through the blinding storm. It felt like hours, but was probably only minutes before the lights of the ranch house appeared through the white. They burst through the door in a flurry of snow and ice. Mrs. Henderson took charge, directing the men to carry Sam to the parlor where a fire blazed. Emma dropped to her knees beside him, pulling away his frozen outer clothes with shaking hands. "Shoulders definitely out," Jake confirmed. "Need to set it before he warms up too much." "I can do it," Emma said. "My father. I've done it before." She didn't elaborate on the circumstances bar fights her father had gotten into, coming home damaged and too proud to see a doctor. With Jake holding Sam steady, Emma grasped his arm, remembering the technique Mrs. Kowalski had taught her. One swift, sure movement, and the joint slipped back into place. Sam groaned, his eyes fluttering open. "Emma," his voice was confused, pained. "What? The storm?" "You're safe," she assured him, tears streaming down her face. "You're home." As the men warmed up with coffee and whiskey, the story emerged. The storm had spooked the horses. Sam's mount had stumbled, throwing him against the rocks. They'd managed to find minimal shelter, but would have frozen by morning if Emma hadn't found them. "Damn foolish thing to do," Jake told her gruffly, but his eyes were warm with respect. "Also the bravest thing I've seen in 20 years of ranching." Dr. Peterson arrived once the storm began to calm, summoned by Timothy, who'd braved the weather on horseback. He examined Sam thoroughly, confirming the shoulder was properly set and checking for frostbite. "He's lucky," the doctor pronounced. "A few more hours out there." He turned to Emma. "I hear you're the hero of the hour." Emma flushed. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Sam said quietly from the sofa. His eyes were fixed on her face with an intensity that made her heart race. "Not anyone. Only someone with extraordinary courage and love." The room fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause in its howling. Emma met Sam's gaze steadily, no longer able or willing to hide behind propriety. "Yes," she said simply. "Love." "Dr. Peterson cleared his throat. "Well, that is Mrs. Henderson. Perhaps you could show me to the kitchen. I could use some coffee before heading back." The room emptied with remarkable speed, leaving Sam and Emma alone. She knelt beside the sofa, finally allowing herself to truly look at him disheveled, exhausted, but wonderfully alive. "You could have died," Sam said softly, "coming out in that storm." "So could you. Did you think I would just sit here and let that happen?" He reached out with his good arm, touching her face gently. "All those evenings in my study, you thought I was asleep." Heat flooded her cheeks. You heard?" Every word. His thumb traced the line of her jaw. Every whispered secret, every confession, every beautiful word. I'm sorry for the deception, but I needed to know. After Margaret, I didn't think I could. I didn't think I deserved. Samuel Hawthorne. Emma interrupted firmly. You deserve every happiness this life can offer. Margaret knew that. It's why she made you promise to keep living. But you deserve better than a broken-down rancher old enough to... She silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. What I deserve is a man who sees me, who values my mind as well as my hands, who makes me feel safe for the first time in years. What I deserve is you, if you'll have me. His eyes filled with wonder. Have you, Emma? These past months, you've brought light back into this house, into my life. I tried to fight it, told myself it was too soon, that I was betraying Margaret's memory. But then you were there every evening, sharing your heart, and I realized something. What? She whispered. That Margaret would have loved you, that she would have chosen you for me if she could. That loving you doesn't diminish what we had, it honors it. Because she taught me how to love deeply, truly, without reservation. And that's how I love you. Emma Walsh. The tears came then, healing tears that washed away years of pain and loneliness for them both. Sam pulled her close with his good arm, and she buried her face against his chest, feeling his heart beat strong and steady beneath her cheek. The town will talk, she murmured eventually. A rich rancher and his maid. Let them talk. His voice was fierce. I've spent 5 years caring what people think, maintaining appearances, playing the proper grieving widower. I'm done with that. You risked your life for me tonight. You've saved me in more ways than you know. If the good people of Helena have a problem with that, they can take it up with me directly. Emma lifted her head to look at him. Are you sure your reputation... My reputation can go to blazes. All I care about is this Emma Walsh. Will you marry me, not as master and servant, but as equals? Will you help me run this ranch, raise cattle, maybe even raise children again someday? Will you fill this house with laughter and arguments and burnt dinners and perfect mornings? Will you be my wife? The smile that broke across her face was like sunrise after the storm. Yes, yes to all of it, yes forever. He kissed her then, awkwardly because of his injured shoulder, sweetly because of their mutual inexperience with such honest affection. Outside, the blizzard finally began to exhaust itself, leaving the world clean and white and full of possibility. When Mrs. Henderson peeked in an hour later, she found them still on the sofa, Emma reading aloud from Tennyson while Sam's head rested in her lap, his eyes closed in contentment rather than pretense. The housekeeper smiled and quietly closed the door. Let the storm blow itself out. Let the cattle wait. Let the whole world wait. In the parlor of the Double Bar Ranch, two hearts that had weathered their own storms had finally found safe harbor in each other. And that, Mrs. Henderson thought as she headed to the kitchen to share the good news, was worth any amount of gossip the town could muster. The news of Sam Hawthorne's engagement to his maid spread through Helena like wildfire in dry grass. Within a week, Emma couldn't visit the general store without feeling the weight of disapproving stares and hearing the whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Gold digger. She heard Mrs. Whitman hiss to Mrs. Carroll near the fabric bolts. Barely 6 months in his employ and already has her claws in him. Poor Mr. Hawthorne. Mrs. Carroll agreed, still grieving his dear Margaret, and along comes this nobody from Nebraska, taking advantage of his loneliness. Emma kept her head high, selected her purchases with steady hands, and thanked Mr. Pedersen politely when he tallied her bill. But his usual friendly manner had cooled considerably, and he barely met her eyes. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Emma guided the wagon with practiced ease, but her heart was heavy. She'd known there would be talk, but the reality of it, the cruel assumptions, the harsh judgments cut deeper than expected. Sam was waiting on the porch when she returned, his expression darkening as he took in her forced smile and two bright eyes. "What happened?" "Nothing of consequence," she said, climbing down from the wagon. "Here, let me get these supplies." He caught her arm gently. "Emma, what happened?" She sighed, meeting his concerned gaze. "Just small minds with smaller thoughts. Nothing we didn't expect." His jaw tightened. "What did they say?" "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." She set down the package she'd lifted. "They think I'm a fortune hunter, that I've somehow entrapped you while you were vulnerable." She tried to smile. "Mrs. Whitman was particularly creative in her speculation about my methods of persuasion." Sam's face went thunderous. "That vicious old—" "Sam?" Emma placed a calming hand on his chest. "This is what we knew would happen. You warned me yourself." "Knowing it and seeing you hurt by it are two different things." He pulled her close, mindful of his still tender shoulder. "I should come with you to town. Show them united we stand." "That might make it worse," she said softly. "They need time to adjust. Besides, I've weathered worse storms than Helena's gossip mill." But the storm intensified over the following weeks. Some of the ranch hands grew distant, uncomfortable with the upheaval of the social order they understood. Two of the newer cowboys quit outright, muttering about not taking orders from a former servant. The situation reached a crescendo when Reverend Mills paid an unexpected visit on a cold February afternoon. Emma was in the kitchen with Mrs. Henderson, planning the week's meals, when they heard the knock. "Reverend," Sam greeted him cordially, though Emma noticed the wariness in his stance. "What brings you out in this weather?" "I think you know. Samuel." The Reverend's tone was grave. He was a thin man with sharp features that seemed designed for disapproval. "May we speak privately?" "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my fiancé," Sam replied firmly. Reverend Mills's mouth pinched. "Very well. I've come on behalf of several concerned members of our congregation. This arrangement of yours has caused considerable distress." "Arrangement?" Sam's voice carried a dangerous edge. "Your engagement to—" The Reverend glanced at Emma as if she were something unpleasant he'd found on his shoe. "To Miss Walsh. Surely you must see how inappropriate it is. The difference in your stations. The timing so soon after dear Margaret's passing." "It's been 5 years," Sam interrupted. "Nevertheless, the impropriety." "The only impropriety I see," Sam said coldly, "is a man of God coming to my home to judge matters of the heart. Tell me, Reverend, which scripture condemns a man for falling in love? Which commandment forbids marrying outside one's social class?" The Reverend flushed. "The social order exists for a reason. Samuel, when we disrupt it." "When we disrupt it." Emma spoke for the first time, her voice calm but firm. "We sometimes find that love matters more than convention, that character counts more than wealth, that two people who've known loss might build something beautiful together, regardless of what others think." Reverend Mills turned his disapproving gaze on her. "You would say that, wouldn't you? You've certainly benefited from this disruption." "That's enough." Sam stepped forward, placing himself between Emma and the Reverend. "You've said your piece. Now get off my land." "Samuel, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm not horsewhipping you off my property, which is what I'm inclined to do. You have 1 minute to leave before I forget my Christian charity." The Reverend left in high dudgeon, but the damage was done. That Sunday, Sam and Emma arrived at church to find their usual pew occupied. Other pews mysteriously filled as they approached. They ended up standing in the back. The sermon pointedly focused on the dangers of temptation and maintaining proper boundaries. "We don't have to keep going," Emma whispered as they left. "We can worship at home or find another church." "We'll be here next Sunday," Sam said firmly. "And the Sunday after that. They'll get tired of their self-righteousness eventually." But privately, He worried. Not about his own reputation that could hang, but about Emma. She was strong, but how much social ostracism could one person bear that evening? He found her in the garden Margaret had planted, staring at the dormant rose bushes. "Having second thoughts?" he asked gently. She turned to him, and he was struck by the fierce determination in her eyes. "Never, not for a moment." But I wonder if I'm being selfish," she admitted. "Your life was established here, your reputation, your standing in the community. I'm destroying all of that." "No." He took her hands in his. "You're not destroying anything. You're helping me build something new, something better." He paused, then added, "Though, if you wanted to leave, start fresh somewhere else, California, maybe, or Oregon, run away." She shook her head. "That's not who you are. Sam Hawthorne, this ranch is your life's work. These people, whether they know it or not, need you. The good you do here employing men, supporting families, contributing to the town's growth that matters more than their current prejudices. And if they never accept us," she squeezed his hands, "then we'll have each other, and Mrs. Henderson, and Jake, and Timothy, and the others who judge us by our actions rather than their assumptions. That's enough for me. Is it enough for you?" He kissed her in answer, there in Margaret's garden, and felt again that sense of rightness. Margaret would have fought for this too, he knew. She'd never had patience for society's arbitrary rules. The next test came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived from Nebraska, addressed to Emma in a shaky, familiar hand. She went pale when she saw it. "My father," she said, sinking into a chair. "I don't know how he found me." Sam sat beside her as she opened it with trembling fingers. The letter was short. The handwriting deteriorated from drink. "Emma heard you've got yourself a rich rancher. Should have known you'd land on your feet. You always thought you were better than us. Better than me. Marrying money won't change what you are, an ungrateful daughter who abandoned her father when he needed her most. Don't think you can forget where you came from, or who knows the truth about you. Your father." Emma crumpled the letter, her face a mask of old pain. "He's right about one thing. I can't forget where I came from." "Emma, what if he comes here? What if he tells people things?" She looked at him with haunted eyes. "There are stories he could tell, Sam. True stories that would make the current gossip seem like compliments." Sam took the crumpled letter from her hands and tossed it into the fireplace. As they watched it burn, he said quietly, "I don't care what stories he might tell. I know who you are. I know your heart. That's all that matters. The town already thinks the worst of me. Then they can't be further disillusioned, can they?" He drew her into his arms. "Emma, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. There is nothing your father or anyone else could say that would change how I feel about you. You survived him. You escaped. You built a new life with your own hands and courage. That makes you remarkable, not shameful." She clung to him, and he felt her tears soak through his shirt. "I don't deserve you," she whispered. "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." That night, Emma made a decision. If the town wanted to judge her, let them see who she really was. The next day, she visited Mrs. Kowalski's cousin in Helena, the one who'd helped her get the position at the ranch. Together, they organized a dinner for the working women of the town's seamstresses, laundresses, maids, shop girls, women who, like Emma, worked hard for their living and were often invisible to society's upper echelons. The dinner was held at the ranch, despite the raised eyebrows it caused. Emma cooked alongside Mrs. Henderson, creating a feast for women who rarely had time to sit and enjoy a meal. She shared her story honestly, the loss of her mother, her father's descent, her journey west, and yes, her love for Sam Hawthorne. "I won't apologize for falling in love," she told the assembled women. "I won't apologize for wanting more than what society says I should accept, and I won't pretend that my past makes me less worthy of happiness." The women listened, and in their eyes, Emma saw recognition. How many of them had their own stories of survival, their own dreams deemed too grand for their station? Word of the dinner spread, as Emma had known it would. But this time, the talk was different. The working women of Helena had voices too, and they used them. In shops and parlors, over wash tubs and market stalls, they spoke of Emma Walsh's kindness, her courage, her refusal to be ashamed of honest work and honest love. The tide didn't turn overnight, but it began to shift when Mrs. Carol's own housemaid quit suddenly, leaving her scrambling before a big party. It was Emma who showed up to help, working alongside Mrs. Carol as an equal, not a servant. When Mr. Whitman's prize bull got loose and Sam and his men spent all night tracking it down, saving the banker from financial ruin, attitudes softened further. "You're killing them with kindness," Sam observed one evening as Emma returned from helping the school teacher organize the spring dance. "I'm showing them who we really are," she corrected. "People fear what they don't understand, so I'm helping them understand. And if they still don't accept us," Emma smiled, moving into his arms, "then we'll have the satisfaction of knowing we stayed true to ourselves. Besides," she added with a mischievous glint, "I hear Oregon is lovely this time of year." He laughed, the sound rich and full in a way it hadn't been since before Margaret died. "You'd really go leave everything behind again?" "Samuel Hawthorne," she said seriously, "I would follow you to the ends of the earth, but I don't think we'll need to. This town, these people, they're better than their fears. They just need time to remember that." As spring crept across the Montana landscape, bringing new life to the dormant land, it seemed Emma might be right. The wedding was set for May, when the wildflowers would be in bloom. And if not everyone in Helena approved, well, Sam reflected as he watched Emma laugh with Mrs. Henderson over wedding plans. That was their loss. He'd learned something valuable through this trial by gossip. True love wasn't just about the feelings between two people. It was about choosing each other again and again, especially when the world tried to tear you apart. It was about standing together against the storm and finding you were stronger for it. And as he watched his remarkable fiancée transform prejudice into acceptance through sheer force of character, Sam knew that Margaret would have been proud. Love had found him again, not as a replacement for what was lost, but as a testament to the heart's capacity to heal and grow. The gossips could talk all they wanted. Sam Hawthorne had found his future, and her name was Emma Walsh. May arrived in a burst of wildflowers that painted the Montana hills in purple, yellow, and white. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of sage and new grass across the Double Bar Ranch. Emma stood before the mirror in what had once been Margaret's room, now hers, wearing a simple but elegant dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make. It wasn't the elaborate gown that Sam's first wedding had seen, but it suited her understated, practical, but with touches of beauty in the delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "You look radiant," Mrs. Henderson said, adjusting Emma's veil, a piece of Irish lace that had been the housekeeper's own wedding veil 40 years ago. Sam won't know what hit him." Emma smiled, though her hands trembled slightly. "Is it normal to be this nervous? I feel like I might faint." "Perfectly normal. I nearly cast up my accounts before my own wedding." Mrs. Henderson squeezed her shoulders gently. "But you've nothing to fear, child. That man loves you true, and you love him. Everything else is just decoration." Through the window, Emma could see guests beginning to gather in the meadow behind the house where they'd decided to hold the ceremony. Not everyone from town had come. Some prejudices died hard, but more had accepted the invitation than she'd dared hope. The working women she'd befriended were there in their Sunday best, alongside ranch families, some of the more open-minded townspeople, and even Mrs. Carol, who'd undergone a complete change of heart after Emma's help during her party crisis. "It's time," Jake Morrison announced from the doorway, looking uncomfortable but pleased in his formal clothes. He'd agreed to give Emma away, a gesture that had touched her deeply. "You ready, Miss Emma?" She took a deep breath. "As ready as I'll ever be." The walk to the meadow felt both endless and too brief. The small gathering rose as she appeared, and there at the front, beneath an arch woven with wildflowers, stood Sam. He wore his best black suit, but it was the expression on his face that made Emma's breath catch wonder, love, and a joy she'd never seen before, not even in their happiest moments. As Jake walked her down the makeshift aisle, Emma noticed Sam glance toward the hill where Margaret and the children were buried. She followed his gaze and saw what he saw: 3 wreaths of fresh flowers placed on the graves, his tribute to the past as he stepped into the future. Reverend Davidson from the neighboring town of Silver Creek had agreed to perform the ceremony when Reverend Mills refused. He was a younger man with kind eyes and a genuine smile, who told them privately that he believed love was always worth celebrating, regardless of circumstances. "Dearly beloved," he began as Emma reached Sam's side, "we gather here today in the sight of God and this company to witness the union of Samuel and Emma, 2 souls who have found in each other not just love, but healing, hope, and the promise of new beginnings." Sam took Emma's hands, and she felt their slight tremor matching her own. They'd written their own vows, despite tradition, wanting words that truly reflected their journey. "Emma," Sam began, his voice strong despite the emotion in his eyes. "When you came to this ranch, I was a man frozen in grief, going through the motions of living without truly being alive. You changed that, with your quiet strength, your boundless compassion, and your refusal to let me hide in the shadows of the past. You brought light back into my world." He paused, squeezing her hands. "I promise to love you not in spite of your past, but because every experience made you who you are. I promise to stand beside you against any storm, social or otherwise. I promise to fill our home with laughter again, to build a future worthy of the courage you showed in choosing me. And I promise that for whatever days God grants us, you will never again feel alone or unloved." Emma blinked back tears, then spoke her own vows, her voice clear and certain. "Samuel, when I fled Nebraska, I was running from pain, seeking only safety and a new start. I never expected to find love. But you saw past the servant's dress to the woman beneath. You gave me not just employment, but dignity, not just shelter, but a home." She smiled through her tears. "I promise to love you with the fierce devotion you deserve. I promise to honor Margaret's memory by loving you as completely as she did, knowing that the heart has room for all its loves, past and present. I promise to stand with you through prosperity and hardship, through social approval and censure, and I promise that every day. In small ways and large, I will choose you, choose us, choose the life we're building together." "The rings," Reverend Davidson prompted. Timothy O'Brien stepped forward, still blushing but beaming, to hand over the simple gold bands. As Sam slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, he whispered, "No more pretending." "No more pretending," she agreed, sliding his ring into place. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Mr. Hawthorne, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, a promise sealed before witnesses both earthly and, Emma felt certain, heavenly. As they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in genuine applause. Even some of the ranch hands who'd been skeptical were grinning and cheering. The reception was held in the barn, transformed with wildflowers, lanterns, and streaming ribbons. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself with the food and the wedding cake. 3 tiers of vanilla sponge with buttercream frosting stood as a testament to Emma's own baking skills, having insisted on making it herself. As the afternoon wore on, filled with music from a small band Jake had hired from Helena, Emma found herself overwhelmed by the warmth surrounding them. Dr. Peterson offered his congratulations and a small medical bag for the future little ones. Mrs. Carroll, now fully converted to their cause, pressed Emma's hand and whispered, "I was wrong about you. Dear, forgive a foolish old woman." "There's nothing to forgive," Emma assured her. "We all fear what we don't understand." The surprise of the day came when a late arrival appeared Mrs. Kowalski herself, having made the long journey from Nebraska. "I had to see for myself that you were safe and happy," the elderly woman said, embracing Emma warmly. "Your letters didn't do justice to the joy in your face." "How did you manage the trip?" Emma asked, touched beyond words. "Your husband sent the coach fare," Mrs. Kowalski revealed with a knowing smile. "Said anyone who'd shown you such kindness was family to him now." Emma looked across the barn to where Sam was talking with some of the ranchers, and her heart swelled with love for this man who understood that her past, all of it, was part of their future. As evening fell and the lanterns cast a warm glow over the celebrating crowd, Sam drew Emma aside for a moment of quiet. They stood on the porch, looking out over their land now. He'd made sure the papers reflected joint ownership. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. "Only one," she said, and felt him tense beside her. "I wish we'd found each other sooner." He relaxed, pulling her close. "We found each other when we were meant to. When we were ready." He gestured toward the hill where Margaret rested. "She would have loved you, would have loved seeing this place alive again." "I hope so. I hope she knows I'll take care of you, of this ranch, of the legacy you built together." "Our legacy now," he corrected. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The party continued late into the night, with dancing and storytelling, laughter echoing across the prairie. Emma danced with Jake, with Timothy, with Dr. Peterson, but always her eyes found Sam, and his found her. When they finally danced together to a slow waltz, the other couples cleared the floor, giving them the moment. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Sam murmured in her ear. "I like the sound of that." "So do I," she admitted, "though I was getting used to you calling me Emma in that particular way of yours." "I'll still do that," he promised. "Emma, my brave, beautiful, extraordinary Emma." As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, many pressed Emma's hand with genuine warmth. The transformation wasn't complete. There would always be those who disapproved, but it was enough. More than enough. The last to leave were Mrs. Kowalski and Mrs. Henderson, the two older women having formed an instant bond. As they said their good nights, Mrs. Kowalski pulled Emma aside. "Your mother would be so proud," she said softly. "You didn't just survive, child. You bloomed. Like those wildflowers out there, they grow strongest where the soil's been disturbed." After everyone had gone, Sam and Emma stood alone in their meadow, the stars brilliant overhead, the ranch settling into peaceful quiet around them. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered not lonely anymore, but communicating across the vast space. "Ready to go in, Mrs. Hawthorne?" Sam asked. Emma looked up at the star-filled sky, then at the man beside her, her husband now, her partner, her future. "Ready for whatever comes next, Mr. Hawthorne?" They walked hand in hand toward the house that had once echoed with grief and now hummed with possibility. Behind them, the meadow grass swayed in the gentle breeze, and on the hill, 3 graves kept their peaceful watch, blessed by the love that had grown not in spite of loss, but because of the strength loss can teach those brave enough to love again. Inside the house, Emma paused at the threshold of what was now their bedroom. On the dresser sat 2 photographs, one of Margaret with Thomas and Sarah, the other taken just today of Sam and Emma beneath the flower arch. Past and present, sorrow and joy, endings and beginnings, all part of the same continuous story. "Welcome home, Emma," Sam said softly. And Emma, who had traveled so far and through so much to reach this moment, knew he was right. She was home not just in this house or on this ranch, but in the heart of the man beside her and the life they would build together. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together, no longer pretending, no longer hiding, but living fully in the light of a love that had found them both when they'd thought themselves beyond finding. As Sam drew her into his arms, Emma sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to Margaret for loving Sam so well he could love again, to her own mother for teaching her strength, to Mrs. Kowalski for helping her escape, and to whatever force had guided her across the prairie to this ranch, this man, this second chance at happiness. Outside, the Montana night stretched endless and full of stars, and the Double Bar Ranch settled into sleep, ready for all the tomorrows to come. And in the master bedroom, two hearts that had learned to beat again together began writing the next chapter of their story, one precious moment at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Emma and Sam's journey, please let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more heartwarming tales from the American frontier. Share your thoughts below. Did Emma and Sam's story touch your heart? What was your favorite moment? I read every comment and would love to hear from you.